I'd like to show you today the ESV Diadem from Cambridge. This is the English Standard Version with Apocrypha, what they call the diadem. Here's the back, the jacket. Try to keep the glare off. There is the ISBN. The book is 8 5/8 inches tall, 6 1/8 inch wide, 1.6 inches thick. It's very similar in size to Cambridge's New Revised Standard Version with Apocrypha. It's not quite so wide, and it does have a smaller font. This is smaller than that. Some other Bibles give you a sense for dimensions. Here is the old King James Version with Apocrypha, the Cameo. It's a shorter Bible, not as wide. Here is the Augustine Bible. This is a Catholic ESV. No references in the ESV Bible, the Catholic edition. The Catholic edition also has fewer books. And here is the Schuyler Revised Standard Version with Apocrypha, which is also an ecumenical Bible like this and like this. Two Cambridges. To give you a sense for the contents, I've drawn this chart. The ecumenical Bibles, such as this, and the Schuyler, have more books than a Catholic Bible like the ESV CE, and more books than the King James Version with Apocrypha, although the King James Version with Apocrypha has more books than the Standard Catholic Bible in English does. So let's talk about those dimensions. This volume is 8 5/8 inches tall, 6 1/8 inches wide, and 1.6 inches thick. The text is formatted in 2 columns in a paragraph by paragraph format, with poetic sections, of course, formatted as poetry. Each of these columns is 52 millimeters wide. There are about 42 characters in each line, and there are as many as 62 lines of text in a column. The page dimensions are, according to my measurements, 211 millimeters tall and 149 millimeters wide, so that's 8.3 inches tall, 5.87 inches wide. You see, we do have the apocryphal books in a separate section between the Old and the New Testaments. The margins at the top of the page, so 13 to 15 millimeters. The inner margin can be as much as 13 millimeters. The outer is fairly constant at around 10 millimeters. It ranges from 9 to 11. And the bottom, from a descender to the edge, is 9 to 10 millimeters. The text here is line matched. I'll try to show you that. So the print on the opposite side of the page lines up exactly with the print on this side. In the English Standard Version, we have pronouns for deity that are not capitalized, as you see here. The words of Christ in this particular edition are in black ink. Added words that the translators add for smoothing the English are not in italic type in this edition. The text is not self-pronouncing, so you won't see any special marks over nouns telling you how to pronounce them. In the Old Testament, you will not see Yahweh or Jehovah. You will instead see the Lord. There are headings in the text. They are in about an 8-point italic font. You do not see in the ESV Diadem parallel passages annotated as they were, say, in this old 1982 New International Version or in the Berean Study Bible. The center column references are column ordered rather than page ordered, so they follow the left-hand column to a certain point, and then they move over to the right-hand column, And an easy way to tell which you're looking at is to see which way they're justified. Those that go with the right are justified right. Those that go to the left are justified left. And the ones that spill over from the right-hand column are put in the lower right-hand corner of the page. Font size is about 6 point for uppercase, about 7 point for lowercase. There are text and translation notes. They're collected into a separate section. They are in about a 6 to 7 point font, just as the references are, but unlike the references, which map you back into the text so you can find your spot again after you've looked at the references, the same isn't true here for the text and translation notes. They do not map you back into the text, so there's no chapter and verse number there. As you see in the ESV Diadem, new books do not always begin on a fresh page. First Peter begins where James ends here. Book titles are found in the outside top of the page, as are the page contents. Page numbers are in the inside top of the page. There are verse numbers within the paragraphs. They are not especially hard to find. Chapter numbers are large and bold, large in the sense that they span about 2 lines of this relatively small font text. The print is sharp, but I would not call it particularly bold, and it varies in darkness somewhat, so that in some pages it appears more of a dark gray than it does a black. That's because the print is not uniform. I would say that print non-uniformity, fading, is common and moderate, and I'll show you 2 pages side by side. So on the left I have page 177, and then I have folded over page 192 in the New Testament on the right. This gives you a sense for the range and darkness. Certainly the lighter print on the left is usable, but I prefer the darker print on the right. When I look at the font in the text, I think that capital letters are roughly the same size as an 8 point Times New Roman. The lowercase letters look to me to be around the same size as a 9.5 point Times New Roman. As we'll see when we look at the copyright page, the font here is advertised as a 8.2 point lexicon. And when I measure the line height, I find it to be 3.02 millimeters, and the way I measure points, that's an 8.6 point line spacing, baseline to baseline. I measured the sheet thickness of the paper at 48.5 micrometers, which allows me to estimate the paper weight at 38 GSM. The advertised paper weight is 36 GSM. It is not uncommon for me with Cambridge Bibles to overestimate the paper weight. That's because they use what they call a high opacity paper, which is the same thing as a low density paper. The surface, as you can tell, is very nearly matte, and I like that. I like the feel of the paper as well. It's nearly white. There's a light cream tinge to it. There is show-through. The show-through is not distracting. One can certainly read through the paper. For instance, here you can see numerals. You can see chapter 24.13, see Jeremiah. And if we turn to the following page, you'll see better what it was you were just looking at. One of the things you'll notice is that the pages are numbered separately in the Old Testament, in the Apocrypha, and in the New Testament. So there are 794 pages in the Old Testament, 227 in the Apocrypha, and 240 in the New Testament. At the end of the Apocryphal section, which we'll reach here in just a minute, there is a small section of maps. They're black and white. They're printed on the normal Bible paper. So here we are, maps relevant to the Apocryphal Deuterocanonical books. And you see a map of the Middle East. fairly low detail. Map of Palestine, Temple Mount, and the temple. And you come to the New Testament. At the end of the book of Revelation, page 240 in the New Testament, you have a blank sheet, and you come to the concordance, which is 88 pages long. It is in 3 columns. There are about 3,000 entries altogether. The caps here for the word entries are about 6 points, and the context lines as well. So 3,000, more than 3,000 word entries, 14,000 context lines, and 6-point font. And at the end of that, we come to the Cambridge maps. We have a map index here, a listing of the maps. And the index is color-coded, so you can tell what type of object that is being named by looking at this color code. Map index is in a 7-point font, 2 columns. And at the end of the map index, we come to the 15 maps. They span 15 pages on a semi-gloss surface. They stay out of the gutter. Well, I wanted to show you a little out of order here, but here is a view of the sewn binding. You may be able to see the thread here in the gutter, 3, 4, 5 lines of stitching. So definitely a sewn binding. Maps are colorful, fairly detailed in places. And at the end of the maps, I wanted to show you also this note here. Apparently we have Cambridge content on Oxford cartographer's base. So that I thought was kind of interesting. It's a paste-off construction, and it's on a coated paper liner. It's a blue hardback, kind of an impressed grain to it, not very deep. And there's an impressed symbol here. I believe that's supposed to be a crown of thorns. Fairly clean. It's the spine. Move this out of the way. There are red and gold head and tail bands, which you should see there. It's a single ribbon marker. It's blue. It's 8 millimeters wide, and I consider it a bit on the short side. I would like that to extend another ½ an inch or so, but it's certainly usable. 8 millimeters wide, 29 centimeters long. That's 11 3/8 inches long. Binding is sewn, as we have seen. We've looked at the thread. It lies open in Genesis. I'll show you that. In fact, it lies open from the very beginning because the hinge is flexible. So when we come to Genesis, you see it's easy to lie open. When you come farther into the book, though, you'll notice that you'll need to adjust it because the text does drop off into the gutter. So if you're reading this side, you'll need to press it up. If you're reading this side on the left, you'll need to press down there. Coming into the volume from the front, you see the same liner. Then you come to a presentation page, the half leaf, the full title page, copyright page on the left. When we come to the copyright page, we see information on the typeface and the paper, and it says it's printed and bound in Belarus by Print Corp. We have the table of contents. This shows you the apocryphal books that are contained there, which should map that chart you saw earlier. should match that chart you saw earlier. The 27 New Testament books. We've already seen the material in the back. Books of the Bible in alphabetical order. Then we come to the preface to the ESV. And I would encourage you to read this section here. Explanation of the features included in the edition. This has some useful information about the cross-reference system and how to use it, what the various terms used there mean. We'll pan up slowly so that you could freeze this and read it if you choose. After that, you get to the preface to the English Standard Version Apocrypha. And to me, the most interesting section here is the textual basis of the edition, which says that they've used the Göttingen Septuagint as the textual base, with the following exceptions. 4 Maccabees was translated from Rolf's. 2nd Esdras was translated from the 1983 Vulgate, published by the German Bible Society, and in Tobit, the translators used the longer Greek text, Sinaiticus, supplemented by the Vaticanus text and the Old Latin version at points. Then have a chronology of rulers during biblical times, which goes for about 3 pages. A 1-page table of weights and measures, monetary units. And you are in the Old Testament with the book of Genesis. I want to show you the dust jacket cover, just in case it has some useful information that's useful to you. When you buy the book, it will not be this shiny. This is an archival dust jacket cover that I have over the top of the dust jacket. So this gives you the ISBNs of other editions. There's a black calf skin, a red calf skin, a black calf split leather, and then other hardbacks. These are without Apocrypha. These are with Apocrypha. A little blurb here from Cambridge University Press. And the back cover that you've already seen. The English Standard Version is a mild revision of the old 1971 Revised Standard Version. If we look at its character in terms of departures from the Masoretic text in the Old Testament, it does depart from the Masoretic text more often than more conservative translations like the American Standard Version, the King James Version, the Legacy Standard Bible, and the New American Standard Bible, but somewhat less often than the New Revised Standard Version, the NABRE, or the New English Bible. How literal is the ESV? Well, as I measure literalness, it is to the left of this, only a little more literal than its parent, the Revised Standard Version. It is difficult, the way I measure literalness, for a translation that does not use some special font for translator-supplied words to be to the far left. So you will see translations like the King James and the American Standard that italicize words that are not actually present in the source language farther to the left than the English Standard Version. English Standard Version, however, is far more literal than other translations, such as the New International Version, the New Jerusalem Bible, or the Revised English Bible, which are far to the right on this chart. Next, we'll look at my quad charts. These are the charts where I've compared the New Testament and various translations to 4 different Greek New Testaments to show their affinity. This first chart shows that the ESV New Testament has a relatively high rate of agreement with the Nestle-Aland 28th edition and a somewhat low rate of agreement with the Robinson-Pierpont Byzantine text form. The Robinson-Pierpont essentially is standing in for the Byzantine or the majority text. If we look at a similar chart where the Westcott and Hort Greek New Testament is on the X or horizontal axis, We see that the ESV is now off to the right. The Nestle-Aland agreement, of course, hasn't changed. Essentially, this chart is very close to being a mirror image of the first one. If we look at a chart where Robinson-Pierpont is back on the x-axis and Westcott and Hort is on the y, we see that, again, the Byzantine agreement is low, but the agreement with Westcott and Hort, in terms of all the other modern translations in the upper left-hand side of the chart, is fairly low. And then finally, here's a quad chart showing the Tyndall House Greek New Testament agreement, left to right, the Nestle-Aland agreement, bottom to top, and the ESV does not agree with the Tyndall House Greek New Testament to a very high degree. If you're interested in more details about the ESV as a translation, I have done a few comparison videos in which I've compared the ESV to other translations, and in them I've looked at specific verses, particularly in the New Testament, that should give you a feel for its character. It is, as we've seen, fairly literal. I would say it's a somewhat conservative translation. The English is close to being standard English of the mid-20th century, although they have modified the style of the Revised Standard Version in ways that I don't particularly appreciate. It is not inclined to use gender-neutral language. You will see footnotes in the New Testament that indicate accurately, I believe, that the Greek term for brothers actually can mean brothers and sisters, and you will see what are called substantival participles translated with a one who construction rather than a he who construction. One of the nice things about the ESV Diadem is that there are references in your apocryphal books. You do not see those in many other translations. But there's a lack of symmetry here. If you look, for instance, at Wisdom 7:26, you'll see there a reference to Hebrews 1:3. But if you go to Hebrews 1:3, you will not see a reference back to the Book of Wisdom. I think that eventually should be corrected so that there is an ESV reference set that maps from what we Protestants would call the canonical books into the apocryphal books. Similarly, here in the concordance, you see that the concordance only deals with words that appear in the Protestant Old Testament and the New Testament. So the apocryphal works are not represented here in the concordance. The font is attractive, but the main reason I've held off so far in getting a copy of the Diadem is because the font strikes me as quite small. I think it's essentially the same font that Cambridge has been using in its wide margin editions of the newer translations. And I have a New King James Version in that font, and I find it very difficult to use. So here we'll compare this font to a number of other Bibles that are in the same class. That is, that have expanded books, and perhaps one or two that are just other editions of the ESV, to give you a sense for the size and whether this might be difficult for you to read. I will start with the New King James Version wide margin from Cambridge. It's on the left. It's also in a lexicon font. The font on the right is said to be 8.2 points. The font on the left is said to be 7.9. Now on the left is the font in the Cambridge Reference Bible with Apocrypha. This is supposed to be an 8 3/4 point Swift font on the left, compared to the 8.2 point lexicon font on the right. Now on the left you're seeing the ESV Catholic edition, the Augustine or Augustine Bible, a darker and larger font on the left than on the right. The font in the Schuyler Revised Standard Version with Apocrypha on the left, of course, is much larger than the font in the ESV Diadem on the right. The font on the left here is that in the Cambridge Cameo with Apocrypha. The Bible on the left does not include the apocryphal works. It is the Oxford Brevier blackface typeface, but I wanted to show it as well because it's comparable in size, although much bolder. On the left now is the old Crossway ESV Classic Reference Bible. And here you see on the left the font in the ESV Creeds and Confessions Bible from Crossway, another Bible that does not include the Apocrypha, but another ESV option. And finally, on the left, you see the font in the Eastern Orthodox Bible New Testament from New Rome Press. So to summarize, I think we have a good translation in the ESV. I wish stylistically it had retained more of the characteristics of the Revised Standard Version. I don't like the way in which it's been modernized, but I think it is in places more accurate than the Revised Standard Version. You have a small font. That small font causes me trouble with my older eyes. It is a bit better than that in the Cambridge wide margin editions. You do have center column references in the Apocrypha. Unfortunately, they point only one way. The references in the standard portions of the Bible, the Protestant canon, do not point to the Apocrypha. You have a concordance, but the concordance also only includes the 66 books of the Protestant canon. It doesn't include the apocryphal books. I'm glad that the references are in the center column. I very much dislike having them at the bottom of the page, and so that I think is a very much a plus. The paper quality is very good. It is reasonably opaque. You have line match text, which is very good. So you don't have a clutter issue here. There's none of this newsprint effect. It's very nice in that aspect of its printing. I do wish that the print were more uniform, that is, it didn't fade from time to time, as in fact it does. So if you're looking for a Bible and you don't mind the smallish print, you would like to have the apocryphal books, and you need more apocryphal books than you would typically find in a Catholic Bible. You want a conservative translation that doesn't go very far in the direction of gender neutrality, that is relatively conservative, relatively literal, then this may be the choice for you. Well, that will conclude the video. I want to thank you very much for watching. And if you feel so inclined, please remember to like and subscribe. Thanks again.